Hi, my name is Michael Andrew, and I'm about to give you your free tutorial on the Fuji X-T30. This is the baby brother of the X-T3. Very powerful, compact little camera. I'm very impressed with the focusing systems. We'll have some tests coming to this YouTube channel, so if you want to check those out, be sure to subscribe. If you are coming from another system or you have experience already, you're probably going to want to jump to a specific subject. If you look at the table of contents, you can do Command F or Control F, type in the keyword that you're interested in. If we have a chapter marker for it, there'll be some time code, click on that, and it'll take you straight to that point in the lesson. We spent a lot of time working on that. If you're a beginning or an intermediate photographer, I have to give you a word of warning. Learning the camera is a very low level of shooting. It's just one piece of the pie. And when I got started way back in 2003, we didn't have YouTube, and I had to go out and learn by trial and error. And it took me 2 years of lots of frustration. I almost gave up. I almost threw my camera into a wall. And I learned some very important things. And one of those things was that my brain was the real photography tool. And this is what I try to teach my students, is to pre-visualize, use the camera as an extension to design and create what you see in your mind's eye. That's a higher level of shooting than just going out and trying to get lucky. The problem with this is there are lots of pieces of information and skill sets that you're going to need in order to create those images in your mind's eye. You need to know about the photography basics, composition. You're going to need to know about lighting. You need to understand digital files, and there's some planning and troubleshooting. There's also video and strobe shooting. Our camera can do many different things. But the heart of the matter is when we start combining all of these skill sets together in the real world shooting situations, specifically with your camera. So, like when I was struggling, I was like, why doesn't somebody just sit down and make an all-in-one course that can take them through it in a couple hours instead of 2 years of trial and error? So you'll be happy to know that that course is coming for the X-T30. It's my crash course. It's under production. It'll take about 2 or 3 weeks to put together. It's pretty comprehensive, but it is going to allow you to skip that learning curve of frustration. If you check the description below, we'll have a link going to my blog. Just leave your name, your email address, and we will reach out to you as soon as it's ready. Another great resource I can recommend is Tony Northrup's stunning digital photography. Tony's a friend of mine. He did not ask me to say this. I bought his book with my own money. I checked it out because I wanted to recommend it to my students, and it is a phenomenal resource if you are just getting started. In any event, we have a tremendous amount of information to cover, so let's get started. Let's take a look at the external controls and ports. This is the shutter button, which has a rotating power switch around it. Obviously, this has to be on for the camera to work. The shutter button itself has 2 phases. The first is a halfway depression, and the second is a full depression, which will actually take the picture. Getting a feel for where that halfway shutter depression point is will allow you to get focus lock without accidentally taking the picture, and this will prove useful throughout your photography career. We will be talking much more about focusing later on in the course. The lever behind the shutter button will put the camera into full auto mode, basically turning it into a point-and-shoot camera. By default, the FN or the custom function button is set up for performance boost, but I will show you how to customize this a little later in the video. Just behind and to the left of the shutter button, we have the shutter speed dial, which will allow us to determine either the mode we are shooting in, designated by letters, or the shutter speed, which is designated by numbers. I'll be talking about this in much greater detail in the modes and exposure lessons. On the top far right of the camera, we have the exposure compensation dial, which will allow us to change the brightness of our image in certain shooting modes. This knob is the drive dial, which is what the camera does after we push the shutter button down all the way. It also allows us to put the camera into video shooting or panorama modes. On the bottom of it, we have this lever that will activate our built-in pop-up flash. Most Fuji lenses have an aperture control ring which allow us to physically dial in the aperture we want either in the manual mode or aperture priority mode. The red A stands for automatic aperture, which is used in program or shutter priority mode, and the camera will decide the aperture in those cases. And you will notice that we have rotating control wheels in the front and in the back of the camera. They are called the front command dial and the rear command dial, and they will help us change our exposure controls. The rear dial can also be used to zoom in on the image during live view or shooting. The button closest to where your right ring finger would rest is the lens release button, which you will press every time you want to remove a lens from the camera body. On the opposite side, we have the auto focus mode selector switch. On the left side of the viewfinder, we have the play and delete image buttons. The menu button allows us to access the deep menu, and it also works as an enter or OK button. Our monitor is touch sensitive and it can tilt up and down. The display back button allows us to toggle different kinds of shooting information on the back LCD monitor. The AEL or auto exposure lock and the AFL auto focus lock buttons straddle the rear command dial, and they can also be customized. We have the joystick, which is critical for selecting different focusing squares as well as navigating menus. You can also push it into the camera body to return to center when shooting or to select a menu item. Above the joystick, we have the Q button, which opens the quick menu and allows us to change many camera settings. On the right side of the viewfinder, we have the View Mode button, which allows us to toggle different display options using either the eyepiece or the back LCD monitor. And on the left of that, we have the diopter adjustment control, which will allow us to change focus when looking through the eyepiece. It's very useful if you wear corrective lenses. On the front of the camera, we have an auto focus assist lamp. On the very top of the camera, we have the hot shoe, which is necessary for attaching a flash or other accessories. The ports are under a cover on the left side of the camera. There is a 2.5mm remote port that will also accept a microphone. Just keep in mind that you will need a 3.5mm adapter from your microphone to a 2.5mm adapter in order for this to work. The USB-C port can also be used as a headphone jack, but you will need a special adapter. I will put both of these adapters in the description if you're looking to find them. We also have our HDMI out port, which will allow us to send a 10-bit 422 signal to an HDMI recorder, as well as connect and play back to a monitor. We have the battery port in the SD card slot. So that's an overview of our camera. I've briefly gone over each of the external buttons and ports, and this is going to be critical in future lessons so you know which button I'm talking about in those lessons. I promise that if you practice, the day will come that you will feel you have complete control over your camera, and it feels amazing to know how to do everything. Now, there may come a time when you forget which button does what. Just come on back and we'll go over it again. For the rest of this course, we will go through each of these settings and buttons individually so you know what they are and what they do. A camera's shooting modes is how the camera behaves as well as how it helps us when we're taking pictures. If you are coming from another camera system, there's going to be some confusion because you're looking for this dial that says PSA and M, and we do not have them on Fuji cameras. And if you're a brand new photographer, it's going to be even more confusing. The way Fuji cameras are set up is that we have different automatic modes on the shutter speed dial. We have it on most of the lenses. It's designated as the red letter A. And we also have automatic ISO. So your shutter speed, your aperture, and your ISO, those are the three things that are going to affect the brightness of our image. And we'll talk about these in a second. So if you are brand new to photography or you're super frustrated, something that we can do, and what I'm going to show you real quick is that you can push this back button if your display isn't showing correctly. So we get these different kinds and sets of information. If you are in a jam and you're frustrated and you just want to shoot and have fun, there's a lever right next to the shutter speed dial on the top. If we pull it towards ourselves, we are now in an automatic mode. And I refer to this lovingly as the dummy mode because the camera is going to do most everything for us. And when we rotate that front control dial, you can see we get a number of scenes from advanced auto to portrait, portrait enhancer, landscape. We see all these different environments that the camera is making a suggestion that if you're shooting in these environments, it's basically saying if you have it located on the symbol, it's going to do most of the heavy lifting for you. It's going to, for shooting sports, it'll use a fast shutter speed. And that's great when you're first getting started, but I really believe it has limited applications because we don't have a lot of control over the other things that are more important. So I feel like the dummy modes, all these are basically different versions of dummy modes. I feel it's limiting, and it's going to make you rely on the camera too much. But if you have nothing else, I get it. With that in mind, let's put the shutter speed dial, make sure this A is pointing towards the tick mark on the side of the viewfinder, right in here. Set that to A, and I also want you to set your lens switch on the side of the lens. If you have that 18 to 55 kit lens, set that to A as well. So when we have our aperture set to A, our shutter speed ring set to A, we push that ring forward, we are now in the P mode, the program mode. And you can see on the bottom here, we have our shutter speed, our aperture, and our ISO. Whenever we see white letters, this means the camera is controlling that particular camera setting. When we see blue, that means we are controlling that camera setting. So what we've done is we've put the shutter speed into the automatic mode, we've put our aperture into automatic mode, and the camera is deciding on these. But I'm not going to explain exposure control with the program mode. It doesn't make as much sense, I don't believe. I am going to explain it to you when we talk about aperture priority mode. So with that in mind, I am going to switch the lens from A to the picture of the aperture blades, and watch what happens to the mode down here. Turns to A. That is aperture priority mode. And what aperture priority mode means is that as we rotate the aperture ring on our lens, you can see aperture control is now blue. And as we rotate that ring, we are changing the aperture. As we do this, and when we're changing the size of that opening, you can see that the camera is making adjustments to the shutter speed automatically. And aperture priority mode is a fantastic place to learn, because whatever you learn here, you are going to use for the rest of your career. As a pro, I shoot in aperture priority modes when I am in changing lighting conditions and I don't have enough time to, go through the settings. For example, if I was shooting a wedding party and they were coming out from a dark chapel into a lobby to bright outdoors, aperture priority control is amazing because I just tell the camera my aperture and it does the rest with the shutter speed. Very important that if you're starting, this is where I would recommend to struggle a little bit and learn. If you want to get focus, we'll talk about focusing, halfway shutter button depression, push it down all the way. It takes the picture, we can play it back. There's a picture, beautiful picture of my blinds, right? So the reason why we took this picture is because I want to give you a really powerful tool to change the brightness of your image. And this is the exposure compensation dial. It's right here on the top right-hand corner. It has the numbers 1 through 3 and 0, and there's also a C on there. If you want to make it brighter, the short answer is rotate this dial to +1 and take another picture. We can play it back, and we can compare this picture with the one before, and you can see it's significantly brighter. And if we continue to rotate that dial to, let's say, I don't know, let's just go crazy, 3. It's overexposed. Way too bright. A lot darker, and then that's about an even exposure. So, the short answer already is that aperture priority mode, we dial in the aperture, and the camera handles the shutter speed. If we want to make it brighter, we would point it towards a plus number. And if we want to make it darker, and you're going to notice we have this little meter here on the side, it's at 0. And when we go plus, it goes up, and when we go minus, it goes down, -1. And that's how you make images darker. So as an exercise, what I would really recommend doing is putting on an aperture priority mode, take a picture of something, it doesn't matter what it is, rotate your exposure compensation wheel to, let's say, +2, take a picture, go to -2, take another picture, and if that is all you learn from this one quick lesson, you are well on your way to taking great images as a photographer, because exposure or the brightness is something you're going to change often. So that's the short answer. There's a longer answer to this in terms of what's happening. So I want to go into a little bit of the philosophy of use. This is something that I give a lot more on the crash courses, but I just want to give you a taste of some of the things that you're going to learn. See, did you see how the screen got darker? So the FN button, right next to the shutter button, when you push that down, we get this performance boost mode. So if I bumped it and it went down, and this is going to help things like the viewfinder, it's going to make the camera perform a little bit on a higher level. It also drains the battery faster. And I want you to take your hand and put it in front of the camera and watch what happens to the shutter speed. So as we're blocking the light, can you see that? Shutter speed's changing. So what's happening is the camera is measuring light through the lens. It's making a measurement and it's adjusting the shutter speed. And this is why this is such a powerful tool. There's a couple shutter speeds I need to tell you about. Handheld shooting, try to make sure this number, and these are fractions right here, 1/80th of a second. Try to make sure this is 1/60th of a second or faster. So as that number gets higher and higher, you're shooting with a faster and faster shutter speed. If you're, portraits, anything handheld, minimum 1/60th of a second. If you can, probably 1/100th or 1/125th of a second if you're just getting started. This is the cause of a lot of blurry pictures, is when beginners do not have a very fast shutter speed. So in aperture priority mode, even though you are dialing in the aperture, sneak a peek over here, see what's going on. And it's going to change a lot depending on your light and your ISO. But the trick I wanted to show you, and this is the really cool thing, see as I'm covering it, changes. Watch what happens to the shutter speed when I go to +1. 1/40th of a second. So when it's an even exposure, it's 1/80th of a second. And when it's at +1, it's 1/40th of a second. So this number refers to a stop. A stop is an arbitrary measure of light. And one stop is twice as much light as the stop before. So if we do the math on 1/80th of a second, if we were to take 1/80th of a second and add it to 1/80th of a second, we would have 2/80ths of a second, right? Well, 2/80ths of a second is 1/40th. So that is what a stop is it's giving us twice the amount of light because we have twice as long shutter speed. And if we were to go to another stop, +2, now we're at 1/20th, which is twice as long as 1/40th. And if we were to go 3, as you probably guessed, we are at 1/10th of a second. Super important stuff to understand in terms of what's happening with the camera and exposure compensation. Here we are back at 1/80th. Now, if we were to go in the opposite direction and we want half as much light, our shutter speed would be twice as fast. Here it is. 1/2 of 1/80th is 1/160th. And if we were to go twice as fast as that, it would be at 1/320th of a second, and twice as fast as that would be 1/640th of a second. Now this is going to depend again on how much light's coming into the lens and what your ISO setting is. So let's say you're shooting with a longer focal length and your image is blurry and your shutter speed, dang, we want to keep it at 2.8, but we want a slightly faster shutter speed. How can we change this? Well, you'll notice that the ISO is controlled with the front control wheel. So when we see the curvature wheel on top, that refers to the front. When we see it on the back, that refers to this guy. So I'm taking my finger. Watch what happens to the shutter speed as I rotate the front dial. Shutter speed's increasing, right? If I was shooting a sporting event in these lighting conditions and I wanted to capture fast-moving athletes, probably start at 1/500th of a second. And indoor gyms can be pretty dim sometimes, but moving athletes 1/500th, portraits minimum 1/60th, maybe a little bit more than that. So I'm always sneaking a peek on this. So what happens is when I rotate my exposure compensation wheel, what we're telling the camera is to maintain the shift that will give us one more stop, even if we've bumped up our ISO. And so in this kind of a situation, if we really wanted to maintain that 1/500th, we'd have to bump it up a little bit more. So I know that's a lot of information. Aperture priority mode is where it's at to start. You put in the aperture, the camera will change the shutter speed, And we can indirectly change the shutter speed by changing the ISO. So now let's talk about shutter priority mode. And what I'm going to do is flip the lens switch from the aperture blades back to A, jumps into P mode real quick, and now I am going to rotate this dial, the shutter speed dial, to the letter T. T stands for time value, which means, you can see this icon here is now blue, means we have control over it. And we have this rear control wheel. It's telling us that we can change the shutter speed right here with the rear control wheel. Shutter priority mode is basically the opposite of aperture priority mode. We dial in the shutter speed and the camera changes the aperture. So as I rotate this wheel, see it's changing. And let's say we're shooting on shutter priority mode at that sporting event and we want to use 1/500th of a second. The camera is complaining with these red letters. They're saying the lens cannot open wider than 2.8. So as that number gets lower, the lens opens up wider and wider, and there are some lenses that are 1.2, 1.4. So it's complaining. It basically is telling us that if we were to take a picture and we were to play it back, it would be too dark. So the question is, how do we make this so it's not red? Well, if you were listening on the aperture priority lesson, you know that if we bump up our ISO, giving it a boost, there it changes. And now it's saying, hey, you're good to go at this point in time. We can turn the ISO up a little bit more. We could use exposure compensation. Now look, it's changing the aperture for the compensation. So on shutter priority mode, we dial in the shutter speed and the camera controls the aperture. And we have some indirect control with that with the ISO control. The truth of the matter is I almost never use shutter priority mode, almost never. And so when we have automatic for the aperture on the lens and automatic for the shutter speed, the camera automatically goes in to P, the program mode. The program mode is going to give us different combinations of shutter speeds and apertures, and it's telling us right here that the rear control wheel will change the shutter speed. We can also change the ISO, of course, to 400. And basically, what it wants to do is give us different combinations of shutter speeds and apertures, but again, it's going to be limited on the lens we have, the amount of light, and the ISO. So if you're not getting the ranges you want, you could always bump up your ISO again, and you could get these different combinations. I almost never use program mode. There are some rare occasions, but it usually has to do when I'm using flash. So now let's talk about the manual mode. So let's rotate the shutter speed control wheel to T. So we have time control. So in the manual mode, we're going to dial in the shutter speed, the aperture on the lens, and our ISO. The camera's not doing any of the work for us at this point. I typically prefer to shoot in manual when I have enough time. So it's really a different, the factor is time. If I'm in a rush, I'm usually on aperture priority mode. If I'm not in a rush, I'm on manual. There's another setting I need to make you aware of, and this is referred to as auto ISO. It's kind of hard to see, but as we continue to rotate the ISO wheel, we get an ISO L, low ISO. But if you come back all the way around towards the high end, we're going to get the auto ISO setting. And it says ISO and then A and then a number. So there's different auto ISOs that we can have. There's 3 of them, and we can change some of the settings on there in terms of what the limits are. When we dial in auto ISO in the manual mode, what we're doing is we're telling the camera, we're giving it permission to change the ISO as lighting conditions change when we're shooting. A great example of this would be if we were shooting, let's say, indoor boxing, where it's kind of low light, but there's lights on, or somebody on a stage doing something, singing, dancing. Movement 1/500th of a second. Okay, the aperture is as wide as it'll go, but we want the camera to account for these changes in lighting. So we turn it over to auto ISO, and the camera will make those changes from shot to shot. It's a very powerful tool if you know about it and you're aware about it. And a lot of sports photographers who love it. Auto ISO, dial in your shutter speed, dial in your aperture, and let the camera handle the rest. So that's how we get to it, is that front dial rotate it all the way around and it should kick in. So there's another mode I need to make you aware of, and it says B on the shutter speed dial. Bulb is the little thing, indicator we get on the shutter speed. Bulb basically means that the camera is going to stay open as long as we hold the shutter button down. So listen, I'm holding it down. It gives us a timing indicator, and then when I lift it, the exposure is over. It's obviously going to be way too bright. Very handy for long exposures, arbitrary exposures. There's some fun painting with lights things that I teach in my advanced course in photography that Bulb's great for. It's basically considered another mode. So that is a quick overview of the different modes on our X-T30. So real quick, I want to take you into the deep menu. We'll be talking a little bit about this in this lesson, but I go into far greater detail on the crash course. We go through pretty much everything. And I also want you to make sure that your touch screen is on. It's on page 2 on the bottom. Touch screen setting. We'll be talking about this a little bit. It should by default be on, but we're going to be using some of the focusing modes. So we want to make sure this is on now. And I like it, but I'm left-eyed. So there's some times that I don't like it is when my nose hits the screen when I'm shooting. And we'll talk about that a little bit later. A couple things I want you to make sure that you have on when we come into the deep menu is when we go into our screen setup and we come down, one of them is auto rotate on playback. That's one. Large indicators on. So when we set that up, tap the shutter button, you can see that the numbers are a lot bigger. We lose the mode indicator and some of the focusing information, but some people like that. So it's there if you need it. We'll talk about more of these customizations in the crash course. Something I need to point out that in the manual mode, we still get this exposure compensation bar, an indicator. And what this is doing is it's telling us by how many stops are we under or overexposed. It's basically like a light meter. It's not acting in the sake of normal exposure compensation. So that's just something to keep in mind. Now, having said all this, I like the setup the way the camera is. We don't have a lot of extra custom buttons. So for me, it makes sense to change aperture with the lens ring, to change our shutter speed with our rear control wheel, and to change our ISO with our front control wheel. That makes sense to me. If you are a beginning or an intermediate photographer, stick with that for now. When you become more advanced, you may want to customize some of the controls, including the front control wheel. Maybe you want to do aperture or exposure compensation, and we can do those things, but I'm going to stay away from them now because I think they're a little bit more complex and they might be confusing. So as you guys see, when we press this display button, we get different sets of information appearing and disappearing. We have our histogram, so we can rotate through these different screens. Some of the other information that you see in here is the number of shots remaining on our memory card if we were shooting with large in this size compression for JPEG. We have dynamic range optimizer or performance boost. But as we continue to push this display button, we get this screen that has all kinds of information. Histogram, right? We have our video mode, how much time we could record with our memory card with space that's remaining. And we get all this other information down here, tons of information. And this is referring to the quick menu or the Q button. And the question is, how do you access it? It's right here. So when we push the Q button, it pulls up a menu of tons of other different stuff. So we'll be talking about white balance in just a second. We have our ISO here. We have noise reduction in our aspect ratio, JPEG quality. This is sort of like a mini menu where we can come in and change certain settings. We have a timer. We have our focusing clusters. So, our flash. This is where you're going to find a lot of features that we don't have buttons for. And what's going to happen is that over time, you're going to realize that you use some features more than others, and you're going to customize the buttons for those, and the rest you may want to customize here. So if we wanted to change our white balance, we could come in here and change our white balance, right? So let's just put it to a setting here, a sun icon, and we start shooting, shoot. You can see the screen change, right? Come back in, there's this sun setting again. So the idea on this is that we have these different customization layouts 7 of them total. Base is what you're on now, and then we have these 7 different spots. So if I go to, let's say, C3 and I'm shooting, then I come back to C1 and you can see that the white balance has reverted back to auto white balance. So what this is saying is you can have these custom settings and you can change those settings within each of those customization modes, but they do not stay. So the question is how do you change them? So there's 2 parts to this. There is the customization of what appears in each of those customizations, and there's also the access to the individual items themselves. So the way we change this is that when you're in the menu, if you press and hold the Q button down, just hold it down, it's going to give us access to how to set these up. So here they are, the 7 different. You notice we have different film settings, film simulations for each of those that Fuji's famous for. And we can come in, whatever our ISO we want to change, or dynamic range, D-range, film simulation, we can come in and change all of these settings if we wanted to, okay, according to those settings. So if you have custom settings you want, that's how you would do it. Come to the menu, push and hold the Q button down, and we'll talk about that on the crash course more. But there's another thing we can do is that when we're in a shooting mode, if we push and hold the Q button down here, we're just holding it down, now we can determine which settings are actually showing up in that Q menu. This is super powerful because it's going to give us 16 different positions in terms of customization. And there's a lot of things in here that I never use that I would love to have as positions for things that I do use, like performance boost, because I hate bumping that button and changing it. So I could come in here. Let's just pick something simple. Face and eye detection setting. We don't have a dedicated face and eye detection button for that. If I wanted to access it, I can come in and I have set this up to be a quick custom menu. And once you get shooting a little bit, you're going to have these features that you want quick access to, or maybe you want to control your JPEG settings and how those images are processed. 16 different positions for it. The 4 on the bottom are really designed to stay there between each of those customization modes. So when we come up and we're rotating through C1 and all, you see how they stay the same. So that is the Q button. Let's talk about our camera's focusing systems. They can be very confusing because they are absolutely powerful and we don't have as many controls as we see on something like the X-T30. So finding some of these features can be really confusing. The easiest way to break this down is to think of it in terms of the how, the when, and the where the camera focuses. How, when, and where. If you focus, no pun intended, on those 3 concepts, this is going to be easy. So I put a little focusing target up there. I'm going to zoom in just a bit. So how does the camera focus? A halfway shutter button depression. I'm going to push halfway down and I'm on autofocus single. So as you see with this halfway shutter button, we get a green box around our target. We also get this green dot in the bottom left-hand corner. We also get this audio signal. That tells us that the camera thinks our subject is in focus, and we push it down all the way, takes the picture. So by default, that is how the camera focuses. Next, let's talk about the when the camera is focusing. There is a switch or a little dial lever in the front of our camera that when it is pointed straight up, it's pointed to the letter S. That stands for auto focus single. That means the camera is going to focus one time and then stop. It will not focus after we get this focus lock. It's a mere one-time focus, and we could even hold that shutter button down and we could move the camera around and the focal plane will not change. This is a very handy technique. It's referred to as recomposing. I talk about on the crash course and the techniques involved with recomposing and why it's still a valuable tool to know. Even if we have all this coverage and eye detection, I still use recomposing. Autofocus single, one time. If we move that lever to C, look what happens. Halfway shutter button depression. Wait a second. No beep. And we get these white parentheses around the dot. But what AFC stands for is autofocus continuous. That means the camera is going to be focusing over and over and over again. This is ideal for taking pictures of moving subjects, like somebody on a bike or a kid running or a bird in flight. The camera is making many focal measurements within a second. I actually think it's either 60 or 120 times per second. The focusing systems on both the X-T30 and the X-T3 are outstanding. Some of the best focusing systems I've seen on a mirrorless camera. Fuji is really doing an outstanding job, but that continuous focus is going to measure over and over and over again and does a really good job tracking. So AFS, single is once, continuous is many times. Now, if we continue to move the lever towards M, this stands for manual focus. And when we are in manual focus, the front ring on our kit lens, as we rotate it, that means we're manually dialing in the focus, and there's a number of manual focusing tools we're going to cover in just a moment. For now, we're going to talk about some of the clusters. That's the square you see. On other Fuji cameras, we can have a dedicated button for the clusters. The way we're going to find them is we're going to come into the menu, and we can go to this single area. We can change the size of it. What are all these different zones, points and zone and all this stuff, right? Kind of confusing because we don't have that button for it. So the autofocus mode, here they are. You can see all four of them. We have a single point, we have zone, we have wide tracking, and we have all of them. The all setting is going to give you access to all three of those cluster types when you are shooting if you have it selected in your menu. I think this is a good place to start, but it's a little tricky in terms of figuring out how to change them. The way you do it is you push your joystick into the camera body, and we're brought in to this green box you can see, and it's kind of hard to see. I'll turn this down so you can see it. And you can see all the squares. 117 of those, and I like the 117 because you don't need all 400 and like whatever it is. But you can see the box, this green box is telling us what the camera is going to be focusing in. So as we rotate the rear control wheel, once this cluster selector is up, we can toggle through the different single size points, and then it brings us to a zone, which is a larger box. You keep on rotating and it brings us to wide. So the way it works is the wide zone is typically going to focus on the closest subject to us that has high contrast. Single point, look how accurate and small that is. Great for macro photographers. If that cluster is a little bit too small, we can rotate it and make it bigger. When I'm shooting sports, I'm typically shooting on a cluster of this size, of a moving athlete. If we continue to rotate it, we come into zone. So birds in flight, I might do something like this. Try to get the birds in here and let the camera do most of the heavy lifting. So essentially, the focusing clusters allow us to determine the size of the box we're telling the camera to look in. So once you've figured out the size of the cluster mode that you want, we can obviously move it around with the joystick as we're looking through the EVF. There's some other techniques that I will demonstrate. I'm going to tap the shutter button to bring me out. And so we can move this guy around, no problem, right? We can also use the touch monitor. Now, something you're going to notice that if we are on autofocus single, which we are now, as long as we keep touching the screen, we can change our focus, and this is going to maintain a focus lock as indicated with our green dot here and here. So once we get something on autofocus single, it's locked until we turn this guy off right here. Okay, so just keep that in mind. If you do that and you get this lockage and you're trying to move it with your joystick, for example, that's what's happening. It can be really frustrating. On autofocus continuous, if we do this, so I flip that over, what's going to be happening is the camera is going to be focusing in that area over and over and over again. It's a continuous focus until we turn that off as well. So that's an autofocus touch off button that we should be aware of. When we're looking through the viewfinder, I'm left-eyed, so I tend to use the joystick and I turn the touch screen off for EVF, but I'll talk about some of those customizations on the course. But there are obviously different ways to move our focusing clusters around. With all this in mind, there are some other really great focusing tools we have to talk about. I needed a model, and we had this handsome model show up here. One of the coolest features on Fuji cameras for portrait photographers, in my opinion, is face detection. So how do we find face detection if it's not turned on? We're going to come into the menu. There is our eye and face detection setting. By default, it should be on. There it is. Eye auto means we're giving the camera permission to determine which eye it wants to choose, but we can also give the right eye or the left eye priority, or we can turn this off altogether. Now, face detection priority, we're going to come back out and I'm going to demonstrate how this works, is very powerful when we are shooting portraits, especially with wide aperture lenses. I'm at f5 right now, but if I was shooting with like a 1.2 or a 1.8 aperture, we can't all easily get a focusing lock and recompose. So let me show you, let me turn that off to show you what this would look like just real quick. You know, you want one of the eyes to be in focus. So we would get this focusing lock and we would recompose. Maybe there would be some trees behind the subject. Oh, it's on continuous. See that mistake I made? So it was refocusing. I was like, what's going on? So let's get the eye, get that focus lock. And so when we'd recompose and the lock stays pushed down all the way and take the picture, the problem with it is that at wide apertures, when you move that camera around, you're going to pull that individual out of focus. So this became really tricky with DSLRs back in the day, and we didn't have face and eye detection. Now we can even tell which eye. It doesn't matter where we move the camera. If we're shooting portraits, we're going to get that eye lock. And that is why eye detection and face detection is so powerful on Fuji. Also, Sony cameras are really good. Nikon and Canon are starting to catch up in terms of their mirrorless cameras, but Fuji and Sony are, in my opinion, they're the best right now. So when you're shooting portraits, that face and that eye detection, super powerful at wide apertures. So something you're also going to notice if you're using this kit lens, which is very common, it's a great lens, by the way. It's actually not bad. I would recommend hanging on to it, even if you get the 16 to 55, is that if you try to open it all the way, it depends on the focal length. Remember, that's a 2.8 to f4. So if you see that and you're feeling like, why is my lens not opening to 2.8? It's because we're zoomed in a little bit. So as we zoom in, we're limited to the aperture. So just keep that in mind with this kit lens. But coming back to the whole eye detection thing, if you get it that 56 1.2, which is a really wide aperture lens, very shallow depth of field, this is a dream with that lens because it's going to get one of those eyes tack sharp focus. I've put, as you saw, eye detection. There it is. I put it on the Q menu just so I have quicker access to it without going into the deep menu. So some of these other controls are actually pretty great, and I'm going to turn off eye detection just to demonstrate them. Autofocus plus manual focus. What is that? It's actually pretty cool. So I got a single square, and I want to show you another trick. Push the rear control wheel into the camera, and it's going to punch in to zoom. See that? That's a very handy technique to know. But I can zoom in, push the shutter button halfway down. We still get the beep. We can't see exactly what part of the screen it's on. But holding that down, I can now rotate my manual focusing ring, and I can dial in manual focus. And that's what the AF plus MF is. It's autofocus followed by a manual focus. Manual focus assist just keeps getting better every time. Standard is what we just demonstrated, but now I'm going to show you something referred to as focus peaking. I like red. Focus peaking essentially means that when we are in manual focus, we are going to get a red overlay on the areas of highest contrast. And so I'm rotating this and you can see there it is in the hair and on the edge there, it's turning red. If we punch in and zoom in, you can see it in my eyes. There it is on the blinds, on my shirt, in my hair. We can change the color of it. It's not always perfect, but it's usually pretty good for manual focus. It's going to tell you where the focal plane is, more or less. We can change the color of it. If we come in here, if you want to see blue, no problem. There it is. We'll talk a little bit more about this in the video focusing stuff. Very useful when focusing for video. because video uses a lot of manual focus. There are some other tools in here I want to show you real quick. Digital split image color. We'll do it in color first. And we're going to lose the peaking, but we get this grid overlay. Might be a little hard to see. I'm going to mess up focusing. We're in manual focus. And maybe we should try to zoom in a little bit. What do you think? There you can see it. I'm going to find the edge of that poster board. And you can see this almost serrated edge there. So this color box, you can see that the line is jagged here. And so as I rotate my manual focusing ring, and as it becomes aligned, that edge in the blind is going to line up and become straight. So I know when those line up, it's basically in focus. That's another way we can do it. And we can take this even a step further with a digital micro-prism. Tap the shutter button. So we get the same basic idea. I'm going to punch in to zoom in. I'm going to mess it up. Only this time it's going to apply to both the vertical and the horizontal in terms of the lines lining up. And there it is. So that's about sharp. So those are some other focusing tools that we have for manual focus. In all honesty, peaking is where it's at. I like peaking the most, and I like red. It's just me. Or you can leave it on standard if you don't want to see it. Focus check is, before I forget, I need to point out that when we're in manual focus, we get this focusing bar that tells you approximately how far away we're focusing. In back in the day, they used tape measures to measure, depending on where the lens setting was, they'd measure it in feet or meters. It's telling us exactly where the focal plane is. It's about 13 feet away, something like that. So let's come back into the menu. Focus check, when we have this turned on, what this means is that if we are on a manual focus setting and we rotate our manual focusing ring, we get the punch in. I prefer to leave this turned off simply because I use this back thumb button to punch in. It's the same thing and you don't need to come into the menu to do it. So we turn that off. Instant autofocus setting refers to what we want the camera to do when any button is assigned to AF on or focus lock, which is the default autofocus lock here. Do you want it to be autofocus single or autofocus continuous? So the touch shooting means that when we touch the screen, it's actually going to take the picture. Autofocus point, autofocus area, or off. So let me demonstrate these real quick. Touch shot means when we touch this monitor, the camera is going to take the picture. It's not even moving the focusing square, right? Because we're on manual focus. Let me switch this over. But the idea is it'll focus on a spot and take the picture at the same time. It'll drive you crazy when you bump the monitor. So as we continue to push these, we can toggle through them. There's shot. I'm going to hit it once. Touch autofocus means the camera, it can't focus there. It's looking for an area of contrast. So it moves the square and focuses both. I'm going to turn that off. I'm going to go to autofocus area. This changes the position of our cluster only. It does not focus. And we can turn it off altogether. The one that I like the most is touch autofocus. I use it a lot. I understand, there are times to turn this off. And sometimes, hey, I got to show you this real quick. This is actually pretty important. Do you see what's happening here as I move my finger in front of there? We get this thing called eye sensor. What that's going to do, there's a little sensor right here that's a battery saving feature. So when you pull the camera up to your eye and you're looking through the viewfinder, this gets close to your face, it's going to turn off this back monitor to save battery power. The problem with this is that when we're shooting on gimbals, a gimbal is a little piece of machinery that I use to stabilize the camera. I'll be doing some lessons on that on the crash course, how to move the camera, how to make it look smooth. And there's a part of the gimbal that's close to it. So when I put it on the gimbal, it turns that monitor off. So the way you get around this is this view mode button. So as we push that, right now you can kind of see this viewfinder is lit up. So only the EVF is working. Push it again. Now only the LCD is working, and I'm not tripping the sensor, and it doesn't turn off. So when we're doing gimbal work, this is actually super useful. This is something we can't really see, and when we trip the sensor, it should turn on the EVF. So that's eye sensor with EVF. Turn it on again. Basically what this means is that the eye sensor will shut this off and we can see through the EVF. But as soon as we pull it away from our face, it'll display the images as we're shooting. So that's the idea behind it. Most of the time, I just have it on eye sensor because I shoot a lot from this back monitor. Very common question I get on every tutorial I do is about back button focusing. I don't recommend it for beginning or intermediate photographers, but advanced sports shooters typically lean towards back button focusing. And basically what it means is to take the autofocus lock button and make this primarily responsible for focusing, removing it from the halfway shutter button depression. It's a pretty simple setup to do it if you choose to go this route. We're going to go into our button and dial setting. The first thing we need to do is to remove autofocus from the shutter button, and we can do it for both modes in terms of autofocus continuous, and if we wanted to, we can also turn it off in autofocus single, but because it's for sport shooting, you can just leave it on that. And then we would come back and we're going to go into the function settings, which is the custom button settings. We don't have a lot of custom buttons here. So we have these swipes I'm going to point out in just a second. We're going to come down to the AFL and we can turn this to AF on. This would create back button focusing, which we push in, and we're engaging the focusing systems. When I push a shutter button halfway down, we do not get this dot down here with the parentheses. So this is not focusing anything. It's doing some exposure measurements, but that's it. So autofocus would happen back here, and we get the indicator with the green dot. A word of warning on this. If you set that up and you forget about it, I'm laughing because it's happened to me. You're gonna wonder, why is my camera broken? Maybe it's time to set it into Fuji and have them take a look at it. So if you're not comfortable with it, just don't mess with it for now. Save it for later when you get more advanced and you're sure that you want to do it. Something I want to talk about real quick are the function settings. We don't have a lot of extra buttons, but we have these things called touch function. And by default, these are turned off. What this means is that if we touch from the center and we swipe up, that can open, for example, our certain drive modes. And we can tweak, or we can go to the left and have our film simulations, or we can go to the right and do white balance, or we can go down and do our different autofocusing clusters. And those are all pretty good settings. So I need to show you how to turn on touch. Then we have our auto exposure lock, which I never use. This would be a good one to customize. Back button focusing, obviously. We have our rear dial pushing in, and it gives you a little green highlight about which button we're talking about. And so, this is really the customizations that we have, and not a lot of them. Performance boost, in all honesty, it's not a button I like having there. I'll probably change mine to white balance, to be honest with you. That's just me personally. But let me show you how to set up these touch features real quick. Something you're going to notice also is that we don't really have a place for our metering modes, and it may be something that you want quick access to. They call it Photometry. That's your metering mode. And if we designate that to T1 and come back out, swiping up should give us our metering modes. Swiping to the left should be the films. Swiping to the right should be white balance, and swiping down should be our auto-focusing mode. So if this is done correctly, and we got to make sure that it's turned on the bottom screen, touch screen settings, see how everything in here is turned on. We'll talk about each of these real quick. So we have this double tap setting and showing a camera icon, which is basically telling us that when we're shooting, if we double tap on the monitor, it'll zoom in. You can have it on or off, up to you. Here's the touch function. If this is turned on, our touch pad now has 4 different custom functions. So if we go to the right, there's our white balance. We can keep going to white balance and shift. To the left, those are our film simulations. And down are the focusing clusters. So we can also customize those. Those are pretty handy. I do find though that as I'm handling the camera, I'll bump it and that will happen. So that's kind of a pain. So a lot of this is going to come down to your personal preference. Let's take a look at some of these other options in here. This is the playback button, touch screen settings on. So once that's turned on and we play the image back, this is going to allow us to treat it as a smartphone. I double tapped in there. I can scroll around. Oh, it's not in focus. What's going on? It's a bad picture. But that's going to allow us to play back in inspector images. We can zoom out, keep zooming out. We can go to the left and right. There I am testing a camera. We can go to the grid and then we can touch and scroll. So this is pretty useful stuff. So that's going to help you to navigate. Double tap, there's my dad. Tap shutter button to come back out. It's this guy right here, EVF touchscreen area settings. If you are right-eyed dominant, meaning you use your right eye to look through the viewfinder, this is some good stuff in here. What this does is it allows us to determine what part of the back monitor is active as we are looking through the viewfinder. And when we use this in coordination with touch area, it's going to allow you to hold the camera and move the focusing squares using that part of the screen. I cannot personally use this because I am left eye dominant, and what happens is my nose always bumps the area that, anything on the right side my nose is hitting. And I think what Fuji wants us to do is to use the left side if we're, left eye dominant, because our nose would be over here. The problem is my cheek hits it. And when I get a heavy lens on, I don't want to hold the camera like this. I want to hold the camera with my hand underneath the lens. So left eye shooters, go for the joystick. Right-eyed shooters, don't be afraid to use one of these guys, either the bottom or the full right side. And so when you are adjusting your focusing squares, you can do it by using the touchpad. It's very powerful, very cool feature. So that's how you control it. And those are the touchscreen settings. In this second tab here, AFMF, these are going to have a lot of our focusing settings. We can choose our focusing area, the cluster here, if we wanted to. I'm going to skip that because we covered it. This determines which of the focusing zones will be available. So if you never want the wide or the tracking or the zone, you just want a single point, you would select this. So this limits the number of clusters. I think all is good for now. Autofocus custom settings allows us to come in here and tweak the sensitivity and the speed of the tracking. So these are different presets depending on the situation, and they give you a little definition of what it would be ideal for. Most of the time, pure beginners, I just tell them to shoot on set 1. But when we come all the way down here to the bottom, we can change the sensitivity in terms of the tracking and the speed at which it changes the zones, things of that nature. So it's pretty powerful, but it doesn't make a lot of sense to me to change this in the beginning because we're just getting started, right? Store autofocus mode by orientation. If this is turned off, what it means is that your focusing square, whenever it's selected, it's going to stay the same no matter whether you're shooting horizontally in the landscape orientation or if you rotate it up and you're vertically in the portrait orientation. So off by default, that focusing square is always going to be wherever it is. If we go to the focus area only, what that means is that the position of your focusing square will be remembered between rotating back and forth between portrait and landscape modes. And if we go to on, that's going to remember not only the position, but the cluster type, the zone, and the position of it both. This is a preference thing. I think it's pretty useful for shooting portraits, but there's lots of little tricks when we do those things. I'll point those out. Autofocus point display, we don't really need this. It's basically saying in the zone and wide mode, we can see all those boxes. I don't think we really need it. So the number of focusing points, whenever we see something grayed off in the menu, it's because we have some other setting turned on that it really doesn't want us to mess with. So I'm in the zone. Let me see if we can get those points to show up. I mean, we might have to turn off face detection. There it is. So the number of focusing points, I think 117 are plenty, but we can actually see far more if we go to 425. And if I come back out and push in with the joystick, you can see how many there are. And I'll make this dark so we can You can see that. If you like, crossing over each and every single one of those points, you could do it that way. I don't need it. I've never used it that way, so I keep mine at 117. Pre-autofocus is something I think we should leave off. If we turn it on, the camera is going to start focusing no matter where the focusing square is. I think it drains the battery faster and it kind of slows my workflow down when I'm shooting. Autofocus illuminator, if we turn it on in dark situations, we have a focusing lamp that will kick on in front of the camera. Usually leave it off. So I want to show you guys some of the differences in video mode. I've rotated the drive mode to the video icon because we're talking about focusing. I thought this would be pretty helpful. You're going to notice that we have autofocus single and we have touch autofocus on. So touching on the monitor is going to get focusing lock. It's designated with the AF guy over here and on the bottom. This is super useful. You can see how smooth it is. It's really nice. And that is going to allow us to shift focus from one subject to the next. There's a demonstration that I do on the full crash course in terms of directing focus, if you want to go that route. The difference is that when we go to autofocus continuous, do you see where the square is? It's kind of hard to see. It's going to put it right in the middle of the screen. And what that's going to do is give the camera permission to change focus all by itself. There it goes. It's looking. So that's the difference between single and continuous in video mode. It's going to happen without pressing the shutter button down. So when we talk about manual focusing, if you come into the menu and try to come up to this autofocus manual focus, you'll be like, oh, peaking's grayed out, right? It's down here in the movie icon mode. And so there's lots of stuff in here we'll cover in just a second. But if we're talking about focusing, come down. There it is. Manual focus assist, peaking highlight. I like red. There it is. So when you're in the video mode, just remember that we have to change it from a different position. And we can hopefully get a red outline there on our, there it is. Kind of hard to see. There it is. Very useful for video work when you can see that red highlight and kind of get a good idea if you don't want your camera focus breathing, you don't want it shifting. So you'll have to come down to these focus check. That's the zoom in, the punch in when we go with a manual focus. Very similar to the stuff that we talked about already. It's just in a different position. So when you're in manual focus, it's not letting me bring up the clusters. We've got to be in an actual focusing mode. So when we do our touch drag, you're going to notice that we only have two of them. One of them, this is like a wide zone, is going to check and focus on the closest subject of contrast to the camera. So when we turn this on, should jump in over here. Let's see here. There it is. It kind of likes the center third of the frame. Maybe it's still going on the face. It's pretty unreliable if you ask me. So I tend to go with the area or manual focus only. So this is where we can touch, tell the camera, there it goes, it's going. Very useful, very powerful. We'll be talking about a lot of these features, and obviously face detection. If you're doing any vlogging, especially if you're in the center frame, very, very powerful. We'll go with say right eye. Even in the high speed stuff on the X-T30, it was just absolutely incredible how well it did on those higher frame rates. So those are a number of different ways to focus, both with autofocus as well as manual focus for video. To start and stop video recording, we'd obviously push the shutter button down. We get this red light. You're going to notice the limit is at 10 minutes for 4K recording. And that's just a limitation of the software and the camera. I think Fuji did this intentionally to increase the sales of the X-T30. That's just my opinion. But you can do a lot with a 10-minute record time. It's 15 minutes for full HD. To stop video recording, we're going to press that. Since we're talking about video, let's jump into the menu real quick. There's the video icon. We've got 4 different pages within those, and those are designated up here, which page we're on. So I'm going to come up real quick. Let's talk about some of these important ones. Resolution, if we come in here, I almost always shoot at 4K. That's 3,840 pixels wide by 2,160 pixels tall. We also have the option for DCI, which is a little bit wider, 4096 pixels wide, but I almost always shoot in 4K because I can crop, I can push in, I can pull out. These are our frames per second. We can go 29.97, which is what I use for YouTube, 25 if you're using the PAL system. You can go 24 frames per second if you're going for a film-like look, and there's 23.98 frames per second if you're going for a film-like look. My understanding is that's for trying to post it online. And then we have different megabits per second. You'll notice that the amount of time left we have is in half. Megabits is the data transfer rate to the memory card. So 200 megabits is obviously twice as fast, and it's going to eat up a lot more space, but you should expect a slightly higher quality of video that you can see. It also depends on what you're shooting, so you may not need it. If you're shooting something like trees blowing in the wind, this might be more important. But there's some theory in philosophy of use in the crash course where I go in and I talk about, if you're doing YouTube videos, probably 100 megabits per second is going to be fine. But we also have the option to go slightly wider than HD at 2048 pixels wide. And then we have the traditional 1920. And then we come back up. So aspect ratio with resolution given, number of frames per second, and then the data rate. Almost always right here, 4K 16:9. Full high-speed recording. This is a lot of fun. It allows us to record at a higher frame rate, and when we play it back, we can get up to 4 or 5 times slow motion. The X-T30 was absolutely outstanding when using the 16-55 lens. I found that the lens was more important with that camera body because of the motors in the lens to rapidly focus using face detection at higher frame rates. It was astonishingly good. One of the best I've ever seen of any camera out there for slow motion face detection. I made a YouTube video on it. Check it out. We'll talk about it, and I'll do some demonstrations for the crash course on the X-T30. Film simulations allow us to bake in different looks to our video. Video is a form of JPEG, and we have they're all listed here. A lot of people love the Eterna for cinema-like look. I usually shoot on standard, and my philosophy of use on this is that try to get it right in camera if you are not doing 10-bit 422. Okay, so 10-bit 422 has a lot more color information, which is great for grading. If you don't have that color information, 8-bit 420, which is a lot less color information, I try to get it right in camera according to the look. So that starts with white balance. Make sure your white balance is set correctly, and then you can tweak some of these other settings. Some people get really aggressive with it. I might do something with the color, maybe a little bit of sharpness, but I try to get it right in camera if I have no intention of grading it. And for workflow reasons, that makes a lot of sense. You want to be fast, right? You don't want to spend a week in post on this if it's a quick YouTube video. So different times to use it. Interframe noise reduction, F-log. Again, this is something that I would use, or at least try to use with 10-bit 422. It's going to give you a very flat looking profile. It's going to give you a little bit more dynamic range. Sometimes there's problems in the shadows. The shadows can get very noisy, and you can add some more, it's called crushing the blacks to kind of hide the noise, but that's just completely different conversation. Peripheral light correction is when we're using wide angle Fuji lenses. We're going to get some darkening in the corners. This helps correct it. My theory on this is it does it by adding a little bit of ISO to the corners, but I haven't been able to prove that. We have our focusing areas. We've talked about these already. In terms of the focusing squared, we're limited when we're doing video. And then we can control the tracking speed and sensitivity, which is great. If it's not fast enough, you can see it was kind of laggy there a little bit. So we can speed that up a little bit in terms of, you can make it really, really fast. I would recommend, testing this a little bit before using it on a serious shoot. Face and eye detection for video. We have our manual focus assist and the focus check. It's the zoom feature. HDMI output info display. If we want to see the information on the display, we could come in here and turn that on. And then we can also record simultaneously both to our memory card as well as the HDMI. Pretty cool stuff. I mean, this is good stuff. Zebra settings. You can turn this on. You can even determine which direction. Zebras is an overexposure, and we can change this so we only want to see zebras when we're at 100% or 95%. It's telling us when we're about to clip out. So once this is turned on, the zebra warning, and I'll tap my shutter button. I'll come out here and let's just bump up the ISO. That warning will tell you when you're about to overexpose something. It's kind of a nice reminder. A lot of people love it. Probably better to set it at 100% when you start clipping out. Just depends on who you are. Audio settings are pretty important. We can get a microphone into the camera using an adapter, a 3.5 to a 2.5 millimeter adapter into the remote port. The levels are super important. So I always like to have the internal and the external both on manual so we can control how loud the signal is. So it's external mic. Let's come into the internal mic so I can demonstrate this. And what we want to do is we want to avoid this red. That's bad. So if we were getting it too loud, and this would be the same adjustment once we plug in an external microphone, is we want to try to kind of keep the levels no higher than this yellow part, because if it gets too loud, that noise is going to clip out and we wouldn't be able to use it. So by default, those are set right to manual. On auto, there's a fluctuation between talking and not talking, and it drives you crazy. So just keep that in mind. We can adjust these. Kind of nice to have a custom setting in our Q menu to set up to do this in video mode. The mic remote release, my understanding is that allows us to designate how we use this port on the side. And absolutely, microphone, if you do any kind of video stuff, you're going to want that. Tally code setting. We have time code displays, different ways to manage this. We'll do this overview mostly on the crash course. Got our tally lights, silent movie control. If we turn that on, come back out, here it is. We have the ability to change so many of those settings. I think it's a pretty good one to have on. Just me though. And so those are some of the menu options that we see for video recording in the deep menu. We'll cover more of the menu stuff in just a second. So I want to talk about white balance real quick. And I'm noticing that my monitor, like when I look at this in person, it looks fine. But as I'm recording it, it almost has like a yellowish greenish tint to it. And there's actually something we can do about that. So I might as well I've never done this for a training video, but we can control the color adjustment. So if I'm looking at as a record, I want to get this right so you guys can see it. I'm trying to make this a little bit more whitish according to how I have it white balance. Like I'm looking at this now, it's like almost red-ish. But as I'm recording it, it looks cleaner. So if for whatever reason you need to do that, you can. So let's talk about white balance real quick. We've set it up in our Q menu. We had it in here at one point. Where is that thing? Here it is. We can adjust it here, but I really think it's better to use a feature that we can see it play back. The short answer on this is if you're a pure beginner, stick with auto white balance. This is the first one. And what's going to happen is you're going to be shooting and you're going to get a hue like a yellow or a blue hue in all of your images, and you're going to think, what is going on? And at that point, you're going to want to change your white balance setting. This is more important for JPEGs than it is RAW, because RAW retains all of the original data, and you can usually change your white balance on RAW images. JPEGs, anywhere from 70 to 80% of the data is thrown away, and it's not as easy. So the short answer on this is that you want to set it to the icon of whatever you're shooting in. So if you're shooting outside and it's a sunny day, it'd be the sun icon. If you had cloud cover, it'd be the shade icon. There's different variants of fluorescent. You can see the hues changing on the monitor. Tungsten light or incandescent light. And then we have an underwater setting. We also have 3 of these custom modes. Let me show you how to set this up. You essentially take a picture of something white is how you want to do it. Let me get back in here. So it can be a wall, a bride's dress, it can be these blinds. And so the idea is that we take a picture of something white. We're telling the camera, hey, this is what white is. Hit OK, and that's our new white balance. So that's custom white balance. Come back in. Kelvin There's a longer answer to this that sometimes is getting in trouble with going into too much detail. The short answer is that every light source that we can see has a different Kelvin rating, and when you line it up with the appropriate Kelvin temperature, it should be white. And I know that these lights I'm shooting in are 4800, and so this should be white. It's a little off. It's like a little bit of green because of the way this camera is recording. But usually daylight is 5600K. Tungsten can be in the 3200K. And you can see how it's getting more and more blue. What's happening is the camera is trying to counterbalance the light that we're shooting in. So lower Kelvin temperatures tend to be more yellow. That's the reason when I change the setting to lower Kelvins, we're seeing more and more blue. Higher Kelvin temperatures tend to be more blue, and so when we add high Kelvin settings, we're seeing a yellow effect to counterbalance it. That's the short answer. There's a longer philosophy of use answer on this, but for the sake of time, we can go here. That thing you saw right there is the shift. So when we go to OK and we push to the right, you can see that we can actually shift the white balance in different directions. There's blue, there's amber, here's magenta, here's green. Very rarely do this, although I will occasionally if my white balance looks a little off and maybe you have a light source in there that's, I'm not really familiar with, maybe mixed lighting conditions. More important for video to get your custom white balance set up because that is JPEG and not always easy to fix bad white balance in post on video. So more important for video, if you have RAW and you're worried about your white balance settings, typically RAW files are a lot more flexible. That's the short answer again. Any other white balance settings we want to talk about? And that's pretty much it for the most part. Custom white balance is super useful when you're shooting in different light sourced conditions. Maybe you're shooting in shade, has some tungsten light, things of that nature, but there's a bunch of stuff that we could talk about, and I'll make some recommendations on video lights, things of that nature, and that is a brief introduction to white balance. So let's talk about our drive dial. It's up here on the top left as we hold the camera. If we rotate it counterclockwise all the way, we're on our video mode. And as we rotate it clockwise, we come to our bracketing modes. We can see just below the exposure compensation indicator which of these modes we're on. Here's our high speed continuous burst, low speed continuous burst, single, it kind of disappears. And then we get our, like our filter effects, multiple exposure mode, and we get a panorama mode. So panorama mode is just like you would expect on your cell phone. You can change the direction by pushing on our directional pad. So we can go top, bottom, left to right, just depending on how you want to do it. Come back. We can change the angle in terms of a large panorama or a medium-sized panorama. Here we go. This bar is telling us how well we're doing. Obviously, I'm on a tripod, so I want you to sweep faster, but you get the idea. I'm running out of real estate, and it'll stitch it together and make a panorama. It's not bad, and I've used it before when I didn't have wide-angle lenses, and I was pretty happy with the result. I mean, pretty good. So let's talk about these other drive modes real quick. So coming into our menu, shooting for stills, and then we have our drive settings. Come in here, and here they're set up. So probably going to be easier to talk about our high-speed continuous burst. It maxes out at 8 frames per second with a mechanical shutter. See, this is the only thing that we have in there. Low-speed continuous burst, we can rate between 3 to 5. And so this allows us to adjust how many frames per second with low-speed continuous burst. So if you didn't want to shoot at 8 frames per second, we could come in here. We'd be at our low. So as we hold the shutter button down, we can shoot between 3 to 5 images per second. It's at 5. High-speed continuous burst. Let's take a listen. The question then becomes, can we get more out of that? And the answer is yes, we can, and I'll demonstrate that in just a second. We also have our bracketing settings. Bracketing means that we're giving the camera permission to change certain things between each shot. If we come in here for basic bracketing, look at all the different options. We have exposure bracketing, which is going to change the brightness, either the shutter speed or the aperture. ISO bracketing. We have film simulation bracketing, white balance bracketing, dynamic range bracketing, and then we have focus bracketing. I'll talk a little bit about that on the crash course. And so once you set one of these, let's do standard auto exposure bracketing. You can come into that set and determine the settings for that. So we'll just have to come here at 3 steps, 1 frame at a time, or continuous. I like continuous. The sequence is from even to over to under exposure. So once that's set up, we want to make sure that I'm on the correct bracketing mode. There it goes. So there's a long exposure. And that basically tells the camera to take those images. And so if we were coming to playback, see how that's underexposed, even exposed, way overexposed. There's the even exposure. And that's how bracketing works, is we can program the camera to change those settings. And the cool thing about this is we have 2 of them, so you can have one for ISO or maybe one for white balance, just whatever you want. They're the same, they're set up the same way. Advanced filters, I'm not a huge fan of. They are fun to play with, but the truth of the matter is they're kind of gimmicky. And so like we can have a toy camera, for example, on this one, and we can have pop color. And so when you come out and you look at these filters, there should be a way to change these as we're shooting. See the kind of the effect that it gives? This one obviously really stands out. It's not going to give us any easy way to change that without coming back. I never use them, ever. Multiple exposure mode is actually kind of fun. It's going to allow us to stack images on top of each other. There's the first picture, and we hit OK, and we're going to take another picture. And the idea of this, you can see my hands in the picture, and we still have the target behind it. So the idea on this is that you can take multiple images and stack them together. It's kind of cool. I mean, there's some cool effects you can do, but it's kind of a one-trick pony in terms of you want to, but it's kind of limited because you can do all these things in Photoshop anyway, but it's a fun thing to try out. So let me show you something that's valuable. Your shutter type, it's set to mechanical shutter. We can come in here and go to electric shutter. So we literally have 2 pieces of machinery in front of the sensor. The first is a first curtain that exposes the sensor, and there's a second curtain that follows it, and they reset. And this is what's happening with mechanical shutters. Electronic shutter means is that there's no mechanical shutter, and this is all happening electronically. There are some great things about this, and there are some bad things about this. For example, a great thing about it is that we get a very fast shutter speed up to 1/32,000th of a second, which is super, super fast. And because it's not mechanical, we can come back to our drive setting and come down to our high-speed burst. Now we have some of these other options. All of a sudden we can do 10 frames per second, 20 frames per second at full resolution. Why is that? Well, it's because we don't need the battery power to move that mechanical shutter so fast. There's not as many moving parts, and therefore the camera can use an electronic shutter. We also have this, it's like a sports mode. It crops in at 1.25x. That's at 30 frames per second, which is pretty incredible. That's amazing. So the electronic shutter gives us some pretty great options. There are some problems with it. One of the problems is, hopefully I can recreate it right now. I'll take a picture. Did you hear that little bit thing? So that's a simulated, and it actually looks okay. Oh, you can kind of see a little bit, the banding. See it in here? There's these lines going through it. Let's see if we can mess it up even more. There it is. There's the banding. That's the problem with electronic shutter when you shoot in LED lights. And we are shooting with LED lights. You're going to start seeing this banding problem. And the only way to really get around that is to try to sync up the shutter speed that you're using, which isn't going to work for sport shooting, or go back to mechanical shutter. This will be fine outdoors. There's another problem I got to warn you about, and that is that if you are panning hard with the camera, is you're going to get rolling shutter. I'll try to do it real quick. I don't think I'll have success, but who knows. And what would happen is, there it is. We got it. Is we're seeing this warping. Okay, so this is not good for both of these things. I'm going to toggle the display. So we have banding and warping. It's the jello effect. So this is not good. And we can resolve both of those by coming back into the menu and turning electronic shutter off. So it really depends on what you're doing. Select that and come back and pan here. See how it's mostly straight up and down and we don't get this banding thing between that. See the difference? See that jello effect? See how it's wavy? And that's what you're losing with the electronic shutter. There are cases it works fine, you know, so it really just depends. We're going to talk about the metering modes in just a second. So there is a cool feature in here we should mention. You need to have it on electronic shutter for this to work, and this is pre-shot electronic shutter. Once this is turned on, we can basically pre-shoot a certain number of images. Okay, so let's say you're at your son's softball game and he's getting ready for his first at bat, and you want to capture the moment right when he hits the ball. Well, that's a little tricky to do, right? So what pre-shot AF does is basically when we push and hold the shutter button halfway down, the camera is pre-buffering images. We don't see it. Oh, look, we're getting that banding. Interesting. But that's pre-buffering images, and it won't write them until we push the shutter button down all the way, and then you can go back into those images and find the one where your son connected with the ball. And that can be very useful in certain situations, and that's what that feature does, is the pre-shot electronic shutter. Again, the electronic shutter rules apply to it. Interval timer shooting, we have a lesson on this on the crash course. We basically choose the intervals, let's say 1 minute intervals. Then we pick the number of shots. We'll do infinity. Look at that. And when we're ready to go, we'll hit OK. When you want to start, well, we'll start right now. How's that sound? Here it goes. So every minute there's a timer. It's counting down. And so what would happen is it would take a picture every minute. And this would allow us to do time-lapse videos. We could take them and see it's trying to save battery power by turning off the monitor. But the idea is that this is a very powerful tool if you want to do time-lapse photography, and there are some examples that I'll show on the crash course doing that. Great to have it built into the camera. That's called interval timer shooting. Pretty easy to set up. Self timer. There's a 10-second timer and a 2-second timer. By default, you're going to find this out in your Q menu down here on the bottom, and you can just pick which one you want. I think that's a good place for it. It's pretty quick, pretty easy to get to. We'll go back to mechanical shutter. Flicker reduction, when you're shooting in certain kinds of lights, you'll see variations in terms of the exposure. If you see that and you turn this on, that will reduce those flickers. Image stabilization mode, do you want it engaged? This is talking about the lens. Do you want it engaged all the time or only when you are shooting? You can choose. We have our ISO setting, and then mount adapter settings when we're adapting lenses in the wireless communication that hopefully I'll talk about in a second. We've gone through a lot of the menu stuff already, actually quite a bit. In any event, that is a brief overview of our drive modes as well as the shooting setting in our deep menu. We're going to be talking about metering modes real quick. One more thing in here I want to point out is we have the sports finder mode. And we can turn this on, saying you can't use it with this combination of electronic shutter, mechanical and electronic. But when you turn this on, you're going to see this little box kind of grayed out, and you're going to notice that our resolution changed from large to medium. Look at this medium box. Let me see if we can, there it is. See that guy? Get the display showing. So basically what's happening is we're cropping it at a 1.25x crop on the sensor. It's going to be smaller size images. This is when we can come in and select the much higher frame rates. And there they are. So it wants us to have that electronic shutter on with the 1.25x crop. In any event, that is what Sports Finder mode is, and those are the drive modes. So let's talk about our camera's metering modes. And now Fuji is calling it Photometry. And we've set this up on our swipe menu earlier to be up. And there it is, Photometry. If you're not sure, just leave it on the multi-metering mode. And this is going to take an average of the screen. It's going to look at color. It's going to look at composition. It's going to make a calculation based on what it sees across the frame to determine the exposure. In order for me to explain this, however, it's easiest to do when talking about in the spot metering mode. And what we want to do is tie our spot metering mode to our focusing square, because and by the way, I'm on aperture priority mode. So the way we do this is we come in to page 2 of our autofocus manual focus, interlock spot, auto exposure in the focus area. What this is going to do, well, let's see if we can see the square. Sometimes we see the little focusing circle. It's not there. There's a circle in the center of the screen that we cannot see, that when we pan over this bright headlight, everything goes dark. And as we continue to pan, it becomes brighter again. What's happening? The easiest way to see this is to tie the spot metering with our focusing square. Basically what we've done is we've told the camera to only meter light, to measure light only in that square. And so in aperture priority mode, I'm at an aperture of 3.6. Watch what happens when I go over the light. See that? We're maxed out on our shutter speed because the camera is looking and it's basically saying this light is very bright, and in order for us to get an exposure, we have to use a very fast shutter speed. It's flickering a little bit. The moment we go off to the side, it's only measuring light in the box there, or maybe in the box over here, and it's giving us a shutter speed appropriate for the amount of light that it's sampling in that area. So, metering modes are instructions that we give to the camera to help us measure light that comes in. If you're doing a type of portrait that is heavily backlit, for example, we have light coming in the corners, we may want to go with a center weighted metering mode, which is going to measure most of the center and mostly disregard the corners. We also have this average metering mode, which takes an average across the entire frame. It's not as complex or sophisticated as the multi-metering mode. In the beginning, what I tell beginners is stick with multi-metering mode, and when you shoot in backlight, go for the spot metering mode. That's going to get you through most of it when you're shooting with aperture priority. Again, these things do not matter in manual mode because we dial in all those settings on our own. So that's a quick brief overview of the metering modes, which is now referred to as photometry. So we've talked about a lot of the menu items already. There's a few things in here that I want to take you through quickly. Just for the sake of time, there's some things that are good and there's some things that you're never going to use. On the crash course, we spend a lot of time going through everything comprehensively, and I give a lot of philosophy of use, like why you would want to use this versus this, things of that nature. But in here on this first page, in terms of the navigation, we don't have touch control for the menu right now. IQ is image quality. And you notice that we can use the joystick to navigate and get this red tab. You can see image quality there. All this is red tab, and we get the blue tab, which is camera settings. This guy right here, this is going to determine the size of the image. And we get the resolution here. So just a side note on the raw files is that Lightroom and Photoshop are not the best. It kind of depends, but I think the consensus is that On1 is going to give you the best processing. It also depends on how much ISO you have, because ISO creates noise. Just know that Lightroom and Photoshop aren't necessarily the best RAW converters for it, but we can shoot in RAW as well as JPEG, and this is where they're chosen. Fine versus normal is compression. It's where the processor is throwing out more information, and they look almost exactly the same. It's very difficult to see the difference between those. When we're shooting RAW, do we want uncompressed or lossless compressed? Lossless compressed, those are smaller file sizes, and supposedly we don't lose any information. So there might be a good reason to shoot on lossless compressed. Let's turn this back here. We have our film simulations, and one of those is a black and white effect that if it was on black and white, let's see if we can grab that. Monochrome, we get these other options in here. I'm not a huge black and white shooter simply because that's pretty easy to do in post. We get a grain effect if you wanted to add grain, a chrome effect. Here's our white balance. And a lot of these settings have to do with JPEGs only. It's like we're giving the camera instructions for a recipe to bake JPEG babies, you know. And so this is kind of, we're telling it what kind of settings we want. Do we want a dynamic range priority? Do we want to shift the highlights to the shadows, or make it more saturated, or maybe a little bit more sharpness? In the beginning, what I tell beginners is, don't worry about this too much. Focus on changing your exposure settings, get comfortable with your focusing squares, practice your composition, go out and have some fun to get started. And then if there's a reason that you want to have very specific JPEGs, that would be the time to come in. Noise reduction, it makes sense under certain circumstances. So high ISO noise reduction, obviously we do want, you know, and you can come in and turn this up and turn this down. Just know it is going to affect your JPEGs, and it's not always for the best. Some noise reductions actually soften the images, and they don't make it, you know, sharp. The color space for the most part is going to be sRGB, unless you're shooting for a magazine and you specifically know you want it on Adobe RGB. Anyway, this would be a way to remap the pixels and to fix that at least. These are the custom settings we talked about for the Q menu, and we can edit those there as well. We talked about most of these guys during the focusing lesson. We didn't talk about release and focus priority, which is basically in the focusing modes, do you want it to more focus or do you want it to more release? The focusing systems are actually pretty good. When you turn those to focus, they can hesitate and you can lose frames per second, just as an FYI. So this in here, the auto ISOs, we can come into these and set the default sensitivity as well as the minimum and the maximum. Something I should do real quick is show you what happens. Okay, so 25,600. And now what I'm going to do is use a very low ISO to demonstrate this. Play those back. And zoom in. There's the low ISO. See how nice and clean that is? And let's take a look at the other one. It's not letting me zoom in. There it is. So kind of hard to see, but it's there. There's grain. You can see how it messes up the straight line here. And that's the trade-off with ISO, is that as you increase your ISO, you're giving the sensor a boost. However, it's also adding a lot of grain. So keep that in mind. So a lot of this stuff, the flash settings we're going to talk about. We have a pop-up flash here. This lever here activates it. That'll pop up. You have this very small limited flash here. One of the Q settings was flash power, if I remember correctly, or TTL settings. There it is. We can turn it off. We actually spend a lot of time talking about using a flash on the crash course. We actually get a full-size flash unit on there and I demonstrate that. But if you wanted to change your flash settings, you can come in here and go from, looks like it's giving us manual. Oh, does it want this up? TTL means through the lens. So this feature here would allow us to control the flash output power up to 2 stops in either direction. There's a lot of information we'll be covering. We have manual flash and the commander module for built-in flash. So lots of good information, but the main two you'd be interested in are TTL and manual. We can change whether it's a front shutter curtain sync or a rear shutter curtain sync. We have slow shutter curtain, which is great if you are on a tripod. Lots of good information that we'll cover on the crash course. We did our movie settings, did a lot of these guys in here. A lot of the same kinds of settings that we saw for stills. In terms of the processing, we covered a lot of this stuff. User settings, we can format our memory card. If you do this, it's going to erase everything. It'll be gone. Make sure you have 2 backups before you do that. Time and date, time difference. Basically, if you're traveling from place to place, you can have one place set as your home and the other, they call it local. We have our language settings, 5 pages of language settings, which is amazing. Really is. My menu settings allow us to customize a menu and remember the things that we use the most. You just can come in here and add anything from the list that you use a lot. Let's just pick something just for the sake of it. MF plus AF, AF plus MF, right? Hit OK. And so what that's going to do, let's pick one more, film simulation, OK. We'll hit OK again and save it. back, back. So now when we go down to this next tab below the wrench icon, we can see the two things that we've added. It's now a purple tabbed menu, and this is the way we can customize our menu for those items that we want to use the most. So that's going to be in your My Menu setting. We have a sensor cleaning feature that when you turn the camera on or off, it'll activate it. We could also manually clean the sensor, and I'll demonstrate this on the crash course. We have the sound in Flash. If we want to turn that off, we can. We can reset our settings. Sounds, beeps, timers, shutters for all kinds of stuff. So we have a shutter volume. Remember when we have that electronic shutter? If we want to turn that off, we can. Did you see the shutter sound? There it is. You can choose between different sounds. It's really up to you. We talked about the different brightnesses and colors already. Image display, if you want it to play back automatically when you're taking a picture. I'll cover pretty much all this stuff on the crash course. There's tons to go into. This video itself is going to be long. We have our button settings. There's different ways we can customize the command dial even. It's kind of confusing, but we can set up the front command dial to do our f-stops, exposure compensation when it's rotated to the C position, ISO, and then our back dial is shutter speed. I try to get away from the customizations in the beginning because beginners get confused with it. If you adapt a lens over, you're going to want to come in here and shoot without lens. The focus ring, we can change the direction that it focuses in if you want. We can go from non-linear to linear. So many customizations in here. We talked about that already. Auto power off. In terms of how we save things to the memory card, when we swap memory cards, do you want it to be continuous or do you want to start over? Save original image refers to red eye reduction. So if we have the red eye reduction feature turned on, it's going to clean up the eyes, and it's asking, do you want to save the original file? Because sometimes we get those artifacts in there. We can edit the file name that's saved to the memory card if we wanted to, depending on whether it's sRGB or Adobe RGB. So this data setup, we can come in to select different folders if we want to. We can also create new folders, and the way this works is that after we've set this up and we take new pictures, then it'll start creating the new folder. Until you take the new pictures, it's not going to work. What else do we got in here? And then we have connection setting, which is the Bluetooth setting. Interesting thing about this is that the Wi-Fi setting isn't in here. We'll talk about this when we talk about the Wi-Fi connecting to the app. But you can connect with your Bluetooth to help you to connect to your phone, and that'll help you connect to your Wi-Fi. You'll see your camera or your smartphone in here once it's done. I think the Wi-Fi is better. We have some general camera settings in terms of the name. We can do geotagging if you want to pull that information off your smartphone and embed it. I usually turn that stuff off. And do you want to designate the Bluetooth or the Wi-Fi to this feature, which you can custom set to a button? Let's see what else we got in here. Reset the wireless. So that's a quick overview of the menu. We spend a lot more time on it on the full crash course, and I want to give you a quick lesson now on setting up with the Fujifilm app. So I need to temper your expectations for the app, the Fujifilm Cam Remote app. You need to download it from either Apple's App Store or the Google Play Store. I'm doing this on an iPhone 10. I want to temper your expectations a little bit because there are some things I've found frustrating. The first thing we need to do is to pair the camera with the smartphone. And this is easier done with Bluetooth. It's like an introduction. We're telling them to say, all right, you guys need to be friends now. Come into pairing registration. And it's going to tell us to turn on the app. We're going to come into the app. We're going to go to pairing registration. And so here's the introduction. We're saying, choose the camera you want to pair. I have this X-T30. It has a little serial number. There we go. It's going to ask us if we want to set the time from the smartphone. We can hit OK. We're going to hit OK on the phone. So now we're connected by Bluetooth, and you can see it's trying to connect by Wi-Fi. So if we come into our Wi-Fi settings, MM is my normal network. So we don't see nope, still not there. So if we don't see that Wi-Fi setting, we may have to come into our camera. Try to go up here. It's kind of in a weird place on the second page of the shooting. Now we're turning our Wi-Fi on. Let's see if it kicks on. And so this is setting up the Wi-Fi signal from the camera. I'm going to reset this, kind of like refresh it to see if it'll pop up. There it is. So now we're connected by Wi-Fi, and in order to get the cool features working, you really got to have the Wi-Fi connection. So I need to point out a couple cool things in here is that we can set up auto transfer of the images. I don't recommend leaving that on. We can delete the pairing registration, the firmware updates. So Fuji often comes out with updates for the software for the camera, and we can update it through our phone. We can reset it as the name of the phone. We have this remote release. This is one of the few things that we can actually do without kicking us out of the app. It's a little laggy. There it goes. So if you just want to release, there it is. The most useful thing in here, I personally believe, is the remote control. And so the idea on this, see, it wants to reconnect by Wi-Fi. The idea on this is that we're able to change camera settings remotely with the app. And so 20 to 30 feet around that range is you'll start losing signal. It's asking if you want to connect. We're going to hit OK. And here is the remote. So we have, our focusing mode, our flash mode. We have our picture styles, number of shots remaining. We have what shooting mode we're in red. There's our shutter speed, aperture, ISO. We can change our shutter speed by tapping to the left or right, and we get an exposure preview. We can tap on the monitor in focus. Very nice. If we wanted to change the aperture, we touch that guy right there. And now we can control our aperture. We can bump up our ISO here if we wanted to. Where's that guy? Bump it way up. We'll hit OK. We have other controls in terms of film simulation, white balance, our flash mode. We have a timer here. Hit OK. So everything's all set up. I'm ready to go. We can hit that, take the picture, change our focusing point. So it's pretty nice when it works. We can also flip this over to a video mode, and we can start and stop video recording if we wanted to. I'll actually use this feature when we do the video course on the crash course. It allows me to be in the shot and I can see where I am. So I use it quite a bit when I'm in front of the camera. Another thing we can do is play the images back. And we can select images for download here. Let's just select a couple. I think this is the easiest place to do it. We can hit import. So it's going to import those 3 images, and you'll notice that one of those images was a video clip. There are other places in the app that if you try to download it, it will not let you do video clips. So it's saving. We're getting these little check marks as it goes. So you can see that when we're trying to download a full-size video, even a couple seconds, it just takes forever. I'm going to cancel out of that for the sake of time. I'm going to come back out. See if we've covered everything we have. I'm going to come back out again. This is where I start having problems with it. Is it kicks us out of the app. So when we leave the camera remote, we have to start over again in terms of reconnecting, which is not fun. There are some, let me see here. It's searching. See, it's kicked us out. So once it's come back in, reconnect. So I'm going to have to come out and refresh the screen. There it is. This is the part that's not really fun with the app. It can be improved. We can browse the camera, sort of like it doesn't work quite as good from here. We can come into receive, but again, it's going to want us to connect. And then we would select from the camera what we want to send, and we hit OK, and it's going to transmit that picture. When you hit end, it kicks you out again. And then you guessed it, have to come in here, turn this back on again. So this is the frustrating thing with it, but it connects pretty quick once you're there. Most of the good stuff can happen from this remote control part of it. Coming back out. So it has a little help screen if you're having a hard time connecting, but most of the stuff we already demonstrated. So that's really kind of the basic overview on the app in terms of how to connect. Just remember that Bluetooth isn't enough to do the shooting stuff. I've had some problems connecting and reconnecting, and I've demonstrated some of that. But in any event, that is the Fujifilm remote app. So when we're talking about recommended lenses, the kit lens is probably the best place to start. It's an 18-55 with a variable aperture, which means that as you zoom in and out, your maximum aperture will change. It's actually a pretty decent do-it-all lens. And even if you upgrade to something like the 16-55 2.8, I would still hang on to this. And when I upgraded, I sold it and I regretted it and I went back and bought another one. It's just so light and compact and can do a lot of different things. That 16-55 2.8 is my go-to for video production. There's linear motors in there. They're faster. They are more quiet. It's a sharper lens. Overall, it's amazing if you do video work. If you do any kind of portrait work or you need a mid-range zoom, you're looking at the 50-140 2.8, phenomenal lens. And if you do any kind of wildlife or sport shooting, I would also recommend the 100-400. I just bought it. I love it. I take it to the bird park a lot. At some point, you might want a wide-angle lens. I like the 10-24 f4 over the 8-16 2.8 that just came out. That 8-16 is really a specialty lens for interior architecture, I believe. Very interesting lens, but the 10-24, I prefer it a little bit more for the value. Definitely should look at a tripod. If you're looking to save money, you can probably find them all day long on eBay. I like the Bogen Manfrotto B-Free. The carbon fiber one's a little bit more expensive, but it's very small, light, compact. There's also another company called Mi Photo. They have also similar type configurations with those locking ball heads. You're also going to want to invest in extra batteries. In the course of this production, we went through 4 of them. And that's just leaving the camera on, talking about the different features. So you're going to go through those pretty quick. I would also recommend getting an external charger. I'm not a huge fan of locking the camera up to charge. And so I always like to have a battery on the charger and have them ready to go. So that's going to help with the bottleneck a little bit. Having said all this, I still believe the best investment you can make is right here. The knowledge and information to become a great photographer is something that will remain with you for the rest of your life. The Fuji X-T30 crash course is in production, probably 2 or 3 weeks from the time I post this video. If you leave your name and your email address on our blog, I will reach out to you as soon as it's ready. Comes with a 100% money back guarantee, so there's no risk to you. In any event, thank you for joining me on this overview tutorial of the Fuji X-T30. Congratulations on a great camera, and I will see you next time.